Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you again live from Film Fanatic headquarters. Hope everyone's doing good. It is apparently it seems like it's the end to the this well, at least for a few days to this uh, crazy weather patterns that we've been having here in Maine. Just been crazy. Not a lot of snow, but pretty much ice and some snow on top of that and then rain. Always an awesome combination. So yeah, it's always weird because I just been home the last 3 days. I got some practicing in. It was a holiday weekend. Uh, Martin Luther King Day was yesterday. So, and it's Tuesday now, and then Friday we had off from work, and I had a show, which worked out anyway. But then the weather was so terrible the rest of the weekend that it was pretty much had had some things going on. Had some friends over on Sunday. And then I had a rehearsal or a jam session, and in the morning I taught a lesson. But then the weather got really bad, and then the weather pattern's been like that. It's been reasonably nice or decent during the day, and then at night it starts freezing up or getting cold, and then it sleets. Then there's all the sleet, and then rain, and then you can't really go anywhere. So it's been pretty weird. I've been housebound for like 3 days. It's kind of crazy, but hey, in some ways it's a good thing because I get to watch more movies. So I saw over the course of the last 3 days I've seen like a ton of movies. So more well I always watch movies. Like I've said before, I usually watch a movie every night for the most part. It's usually, I don't know, for me it's one of the most relaxing things to do, and it's a I find, even if it's later at night, I find it's a thing that definitely relaxes me and just kind of, if I've had a busy day doing things, with you know various activities or music stuff or whatever, or I got something going on during the day, I always find that when I watch a movie at night, it's kind of like therapy. It just kind of chills me out, relaxes me, and it really does help with transitioning into sleep time. So, but it's also on the other side of things. I just love movies so much, so I've always been doing that. I don't have cable. I used to have cable here at my house, and I got rid of it because I just realized what a bunch of waste of money that was, and a lot of crap. And again, I don't have any interest in doing the streaming thing. I like tactile things, so I, go to Opera House Video. I go there less than I used to. I used to go for a while. I would go like every weekend. It was a thing to do where I would go on a Friday or during the day on a Saturday and rent a pile of movies and then do that and watch those movies every night. But lately, I've been buying more movies for the last year or two, and especially this year, I've been buying more movies. So I've been like living with those a lot. I've been watching lots of movies I've been buying at going up to Blue Moose a little bit more. My collection's gotten a little bit bigger and a little bit better, so I've been digging into those movies more. Movies that I like, and then if I eventually fall in love with them, I end up watching them numerous times. I have no qualms about watching a movie, saying that, like, say somebody will say, well, I really love this one particular movie, and they say, well, I've seen it about 4 or 5 times over the course of my lifetime. I'll For me, it's usually way more to where if it's a film I'm into, I'll watch it to the point of where I don't even I lose count as to how many times I've actually seen it. To me, it's just it's a I don't know, a way of life, and it's a constant source of inspiration and the ultimate form of entertainment, and also the ultimate uh, form of escapism. It's just it's wonderful. So this past weekend on Saturday, when the weather did kind of break a little bit, I did go out to Opera House Video and I rented a bunch of movies. So today I'm going to do a show on one of the greatest directors that's ever, I think, in cinematic history. One of the greatest directors ever, and especially when some directors have this period of where they go through maybe about, say, like early in their career where they just put out just one incredible movie after another. And again, this is all a matter of opinion. And then some directors, when they get to be maybe a certain age, or maybe a later part of their career, their movies just aren't as good, or they're just feels like they might have like checked out a little bit as far as the quality control gets a little bit worse, and they and to an extreme case, certain filmmakers, they kind of do these movies where it almost feels like it's like a paycheck. That's pretty rare, I think. But the other thing I think that's relatively rare are filmmakers that have a real long lasting career of movies that they're all like at this high level, and they're all pretty damn good, and they have this level of consistency throughout their career. It's pretty rare, but there's definitely a lot of directors I feel that's happened to. Uh, I think as far as newer, more modern directors that have a real consistent body of work, that all of the films for the most part are all really really strong, and they're all pretty high caliber. They're all at a pretty high caliber level. I would say Quentin Tarantino would be one. I think throughout his career and where he is now as a director, he he has a pretty damn hot list of movies, like pretty consistent for the most part. And in some ways, I almost feel like the older he's gotten, the better he's almost gotten as a director. I feel like he's gotten even a stronger sense of his vision, and even more. His films have gotten, to a degree, even more diverse and more rich. His last film that he did, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think is just an incredible movie, and that movie has so many layers to it. I think that's maybe an example of that, where he's now like this real seasoned director, and he's having more and more fun with his art, with his craft, and you kind of feel that in his films. And I felt you get a big sense of that in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Also, I feel it was interesting. I watched a couple of these exploitation movies. I had a friend over a few weeks ago, and we watched a couple of like pretty low budget exploitation movies, and then we ended up watching Jackie Brown from Quentin Tarantino. She had never seen it, and I was like, "Yeah, this is like a perfect segue because he has a lot of those aesthetics, and is very much influenced by a lot of those films. So it was really cool, and you could see the influence of a lot of the '70s uh, movies from the '70s and '60s and '80s, early '80s, like a lot of the exploitation movies. You could really see it in Jackie Brown. It was really, especially with Pam Grier, who was like the queen of, exploitation, black exploitation in the '60s and '70s, and Robert Forster, who was also in that, who was also in many movies in the '70s that were considered to be exploitation movies. So it was really cool watching that, you know, uh, after watching some, real deal exploitation movies. And Quentin Tarantino has this thing where he doesn't really do genre specific movies. He'll show films, like he said, it's very hard for him to do a straight kind of film, like a straight western or a straight martial arts movie or a straight horror film. He'll do he'll have influences of those particular genres, but he'll kind of mess with it and be a little bit more outside the box. But I think he's really a really great example of a really strong and incredible director, real consistent, and a high caliber, a real high caliber body of work. I think another director that has that also is Martin Scorsese. One of those directors that just keeps putting out really great movies. One of his last movies, or his last movie that he just recently had put out about a year or two ago, was The Irishman, which I think is one of his best movies. I think it's just this epic film that came out of nowhere. Just, just an amazing film, and I think he really brought back and showed and got and really showcased and showed the true acting power that Robert De Niro had when he was younger, and also Al Pacino. For many years after their heyday, they kind of became parodies of themselves, and they kind of played themselves, and were I felt were in this state of like automatic pilot, and they were just doing any movie that they were offered. But at their height of their power, when they were younger, they were the best of their generation. But The Irishman really showcased that. But I think overall Scorsese has that. He has, just an incredible body of work. They're all really, really consistent. I love pretty much all of his films. And I think two other directors that I can think of is Akira Kurosawa, who's one of my favorite directors, famous Japanese director. Really consistent, like close to 100 movies, but they're all just amazing, and they're all just so strong and powerful and evocative, and everything from his more melodrama stuff that he did later in his career to his like early samurai work, um, Seven Samurai, Ron. I mean, there's so many great movies. But the thing with him is consistency. Right up until he passed away, and when he was younger, it was just like right through his entire career, you could see that he always had that fire. Um, and I think to a degree, and then another one for me, which I think for me personally, well, he's my favorite director of all time. But for me, it really is an example of what I'm talking about. Like uh, in like this totally, you know, uh, in this like absolute example, is Stanley Kubrick, my favorite director of all time, and I think easily like all of his films are just so incredibly amazing and so strong and just so provocative and just so powerful. From the early days to right up until he passed away, just an amazing body of work. Like he was always like this restless maverick, and just this incredible artist. And for me, my personal favorite, my favorite director of all time. But then I also feel like looking at his body of work, this the biggest and the best example of that, of like that kind of strong consistency throughout his career. And and then I think like directors who might not have that, or like where I feel I'm not sure what happens, but there's this thing of where they kind of fall off the tracks, or maybe they have a few films that commercially don't do so well, or they work with other studios and there's more pressure put on them, and they kind of lose a little bit more of their vision, and gradually the films uh, get kind of neutered, and then when you look, and especially in their later part of their career, but if you look back to like say their more recent films to the early part of their career, it almost feels like a different director. But I think one example, and I think there's a lot of examples of that. And again, it's just my matter of opinion, but I feel like Ridley Scott is one of those directors. In the height of his power, well, especially when he was young, just did so many incredible movies, and one after another. But then I don't know what happened. I felt like things went awry and went astray, and I don't know what that was really due to. Lots of inconsistencies, especially later on in his career, especially with the whole Alien franchise. I'm not sure what happened with that. And you look at, if you look at Alien Covenant, which was one of his more, later recent films, or his last one of his last science fiction movies, And then you watch Alien or you watch Blade Runner or The Duelist. It's a different director. I think The Martian was a film that he did in the later part of his career. That's actually really good, but you know, pretty inconsistent. There's a lot of movies I feel in his later part of his career that are pretty forgettable and not really nowhere near as strong as his earlier part. And I think another great example of that is the director I'm talking about today is Brian De Palma. Again, one of those directors that was just a total powerhouse, total maverick, one of the greatest directors ever. And we had films like he did earlier in his career, Dress to Kill, Body Double, and then later in his career he did like Mission to Mars and like Snake Eyes, and he kind of he's still alive and he's still around, but he kind of retired from making films. For the most part, he hasn't done anything in many many years. But if you look at his earlier part like of his career in the '70s through the early '80s, through to a degree even in the '90s, and then kind of where his career ended up with like maybe the last group of films that he directed, you kind of don't recognize, at least for me, you don't really recognize it as being Brian De Palma, especially if you love his earlier work. Because I think, at the height of his power and when he was, you know, when he was such a strong, incredible director, like I think he was easily, Brian De Palma was easily one of the best directors ever around. Just amazing. And so today's show I'm going to be talking about The Fury, which is a movie I've always heard about and never seen it. I just couldn't believe it. I kicked myself for never having seen this movie, and I just watched it for the first time last night. It came out in 1978. This is pretty old school, and it was directed by Brian De Palma. And the other thing that I was so blown away by is that the music was composed by John Williams, which I had no idea. And John Williams, obviously he's most well known for the iconic music for Star Wars, which, I mean, everybody knows and everybody loves. But he really has a real diverse palette as a director. I feel like, as far as the sci-fi element goes, probably my favorite thing he's ever done is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I think that score is just amazing, especially the actual album, which includes music that was not used in the film. He also did a film that I really, really love that I'll eventually talk about called Presumed Innocent with Harrison Ford, which is one of the greatest courtroom based films ever. Just so incredibly suspenseful. But he also did the music for The Fury, which I had no idea. And I have to say, obviously hugely influenced by and a huge fan of John Williams. But this score is just unbelievable. I was just taken aback by the score, and just how amazing the writing is for this. Um, and the cast for this film. This came out in 1978. Kirk Douglas, Amy Irving, the legendary John Cassavetes, Andrew Stevens, Carrie Snodgrass, Daryl Hannah, and Fiona Lewis. Like an amazing cast. And this film is really interesting because it's kind of a full-on supernatural horror suspense movie. And Brian De Palma he definitely has done, like I think of like Dress to Kill, might be my favorite Brian De Palma film. But I look at that movie as being pretty much a full-on slasher movie. Like it's really great, starring Michael Caine. And I look at that film as being a full-on slasher movie, and it's a real creepy movie. It's pretty sleazy, but I love that movie. And then also Body Double. I feel like that movie is incredibly weird and bizarre at times, but it has a big influence, and I think it has it very much has these very has a real interesting horror influence in that film, and I love that film. Kind of a psychosexual kind of film, as well as Dress to Kill, and then of course Carrie. He did that film, adapted that from the Stephen King novel, which is a full-on horror film, And I always forget like that. Wow, Brian De Palma, and then Scarface, of course, many other movies. But I always forget that Brian De Palma did spend, was kind of a horror genre filmmaker. For the most part, he did his own thing, and he had lots of other elements that were maybe not say traditional horror, but like I've said too, my favorite films out there, my favorite style is the slasher genre from the 70s and 80s. And Dress to Kill, I feel it's it's a different kind of thing. It's a little bit more of a quality film, I guess, compared to say most slasher films, but it's still to me a full throttle slasher film. It's very sleazy, very sexual. It's pretty messed up. It's pretty brutal. It's pretty disturbing, but it's an amazing film. Like and I consider Brian De Palma to be kind of like a high level or a highbrow director. Like a Stanley Kubrick, but he explored that world of the more grittier, the grittier side of things, the grittier side of filmmaking with like films like that. And I remember the first film I ever saw of his, of the first Brian De Palma film I ever saw was Scarface. That was a movie that I used to see all the time as a kid, and that movie always just was just so. And it's still, watching it now, it's still incredibly brutal. It's so brutal. It's so violent, and it's still an awesome movie. That movie's got this real kind of cheesy. When you watch it now, it's got this pretty cheesy, dated quality to it. But I think it makes the experience even better. But but that was my first Brian De Palma film I ever saw, and it's just amazing. I mean, what can you say about that? Um, and some of the films that he directed, I mean, especially his early work, Brian De Palma's early work, I mean, just amazing. Scarface, which came out in 1983, Carrie, which came out in 76, which I always forget how old that film is. The Untouchables, which is an awesome, uh, more or less a remake, but such a great film. 87, that came out in 1987. Carlito's Way, which came out in 93 with Al Pacino. That's another awesome movie. I haven't seen that in a very long time. Blowout, which came out in 81. That's a movie I definitely saw that, and I definitely saw that movie, but it's been years. I'd like to see that again. And of course, probably my favorite film of his is Dress to Kill, which came out in 1980. He also, which I forgot, he also directed the one of the first Mission Impossible movies, which is actually an awesome movie. It came out in '96 with Tom Cruise. I forgot that he ventured into franchise movies. Um, Body Double, 1984. I love that movie so much. That's just one of my all-time favorites. Phantom of the Paradise, which is from 1974, which is such a bizarre movie. I have not seen that in many years, but I remember seeing that a lot as a kid. And that's like this weird sci-fi horror musical. Phantom of the Paradise. That would be something to see again. Casualties of War, which starred Sean Penn and Michael J. Fox, which is a really awesome kind of movie about the psychology of being in war. The Black Dahlia Murder, which was one of his later films that came out in 2006. And of course, this movie, The Fury, which came out in 78. I mean, he made so many movies; it's unbelievable. And then Snake Eyes. Now we're getting into the later period of his career. Snake Eyes, which came out in '98, which is an okay movie. Femme Fatale, 2002. Nah, not so great. The Passion, 2012. Sisters, 72. I have not seen that. Obsession, 76. I remember that being a really great movie. Raising Cain was a really great movie, which came out in '92. Bonfire of the Vanities, uh, Redacted, Domino, which is actually a pretty awesome movie. Hi Mom in 1970. Just a huge list. But as you can see, and as I get further into like his list of films, they they kind of drift away a little bit. And as a viewer, if you're a fan of his films, you see like, I mean, there's like at least 15 to 20 movies of his, in his extensive body of work that are just, just amazing, and they're just, you know, iconic movies. But I would definitely say Body Double and Dress to Kill. Dress to Kill probably being my favorite. And this film, The Fury, it's a movie I've always heard about, and I don't know, for whatever reason I've never seen it, but it's an amazing movie. Like, came out in '78, and the whole story of it is Kirk Douglas plays this CIA agent, and his son has these supernatural powers. Like, he has the ability for to he has a the ability for to use telepathy, and he has this low level kind of psychic power. So he ends up getting kidnapped by the CIA, and the CIA ends up using him in all of these experiments to maybe make him into a weapon. And this movie is just incredible. It's way more gory and way more violent than I thought, and it's such a great uh, supernatural horror movie. I mean, it really is, and especially the ending. There's like full on, I guess you could call it body horror, where like bodies explode literally. Um, just and it's so suspenseful. The writing is just so incredible. The cinematography is just so incredible. Kirk Douglas is amazing in it. The whole opening sequence to this film is just like, I was just blown away by it. I was so immersed in it within 5 minutes. I was just this movie is just incredible. And like I said, John Williams did the score for this film, and I had no idea that he was involved with this film, and that was a really nice surprise. And after I watched it, I was like, damn, I need to buy this movie. And why the hell have I never seen? I've never seen this movie, and it's definitely now easily one of the best Brian De Palma films I've ever seen. And this film also stars the iconic John Cassavetes, who is a famous actor, film director, and screenwriter. He's probably most well known for his role in Rosemary's Baby. And he Cassavetes himself is one of the is in his own right, and just an incredible director. He's made some amazing movies. I've seen most of his films. He directed a movie called A Woman Under the Influence, which is just a real harrowing movie of a woman. The story is about this woman who is falling into this deep ocean of mental illness, and it's like a character study. It's a melodrama, but just an amazing film. Of course, Rosemary's Baby, opening night, was another film. Husbands, Shadows, which is a really awesome movie, all black and white. Gloria, Faces, The Dirty Dozen. Uh, legendary figure in the world of cinema. Because like I said, he was a producer. He wrote lots of screenplays. He was an incredible director. He was an incredible actor. I mean, he really did it all. Like, during his time, as an active person in Hollywood. He also directed this other movie, which I've heard a lot about. I've never seen, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, which came out in '76. Just legendary. And he's one of the leads in this. He plays essentially John Cassavetes essentially plays one of the villains, plays the lead villain, and he's incredibly uh, demonic in this film. He's a pretty evil person. His whole presence on screen is just like really intense. I've always loved John Cassavetes. So one of the things too about his style of filmmaking is that he was known for doing lots of improv in a lot of his films. He would not really have like your traditional script. He basically, a lot of his films were essentially like melodramas where they were centered on, you know, or a lot of most of the attention was placed on the characterization and the characters in his story, and it was about either family dynamics, real personal issues, and it was centered on that person's relationship with their circle of friends or their family, and it was essentially his films were always like these melodramas. But the thing that John Cassavetes did as a director was he pretty much most of his films were all like completely improvised, which is wild. Like he literally didn't never really use as far as I as far as I know he never really used like a traditional script format for his films. He would improvise with his actors, and they would rehearse and rehearse, but they would improvise once the tape was rolling. And it also came out of or was very influenced, say, by theater that way too. So he always had this really his films always have this really unique kind of European flair to them, and he's always been one of my favorites. Obviously the first movie I ever saw or heard of John Cassavetes was Rosemary's Baby, which is one of the greatest Polanski movies ever, one of the greatest horror movies ever. And I remember being over my friend Charlie's house, who I've talked about before, and I think we watched a few of John Cassavetes' films, and Charlie was really into Brian De Palma also, and he turned me on to a bunch of those films. And I had only known Brian at the time. I only knew Brian De Palma from Scarface from when I was a kid. I'd never seen any of his other films. And John Cassavetes, I knew him. I thought, okay, he's a really good actor. I loved his role in Rosemary's Baby, but I had no idea he was a producer, writer, director, and did all these things. And I had never seen any of the other Brian De Palma films, and I was, it opened up this whole other world, and I was just really blown away by it. And since then, Brian De Palma's like definitely, especially the early part of his career. I mean, he made such incredible movies. And I guess a year or two ago, there was a documentary that came out where it's basically like an interview and a whole movie about Brian De Palma's life and him as a director, which I really really want to see. But I definitely again, and I got The Fury. I rented it on DVD at Opera House Video, but I need to buy it on Blu-ray. I don't have any Brian De Palma films on Blu-ray, unfortunately. I have them on DVD and a few on VHS, but one that I'd really love to get is, well, this movie in particular, but one I'd really love to get is Dress to Kill on Blu-ray. That would be pretty sweet, especially if they have an edition with some really cool special features. But just an amazing movie. Super gritty, super raw, and the writing for The Fury is just so good. Highly suspenseful. I love the supernatural and the horror elements. It has this really amazing opening, and then the ending for this film is, I was blown away by, like, kind of literally. It's got elements of gore and body horror, which I was really surprised by, especially the ending. Um, Fantastic movie, and I have to say, like I said before, it is definitely my favorite score that I've ever heard by John Williams. Amazing, amazing film. So this is Jason Dean. Thanks again for checking out this channel. If you like any of this crazy stuff, please like and subscribe to my channel, and um, I really appreciate the love. So we'll see you next time. All right, peace.